Alright, people. Review of the week time. So, lot to talk about. A lot of fight cards that were on over the weekend. Obviously, two main ones that were on were obviously the Top Rank show on the States last night, and obviously you also had Tim Tszyu fighting as well. Now, I haven't seen the Tim Tszyu performance yet. I haven't seen the fight in its entirety, but I did hear people say that they were impressed with what Tim Tszyu was looking like, in the fight. He won it on points, obviously. A lot of people are saying, Tim Tszyu looking like he's going to be a good fighter at 154. I even had some people say to me, what do you think about Crawford versus Tszyu at 154? Some people were saying that they felt Crawford would just outclass Tim Tszyu. And for me, Crawford is a level in of itself. He's a different level to these guys. Certainly at 147. You bring him up to 154, yeah, look, he's a guy who started his professional career, lest we forget, at lightweight. So he is going to be undersized in comparison. Like, he might weigh the same, in terms of on fight night, he might weigh 170 pounds. Tim Tszyu might weigh 170 pounds, but I think the natural physical strength would be on Tim Tszyu, or probably be on the majority of these 175 pound or 154 pounders side. But Crawford's skill is on another level to a lot of those guys. I mean, it's on another level to most people in boxing anyway, in general. So I think I'm not going to necessarily turn around and say he'd clean the division up per se, because you just don't know what might happen. But I would be fairly confident with him against someone like Tim Tszyu at 154. I don't think it would be a walk in the park. Make no mistake about that. I almost feel, I feel it'd be harder than it was against Spence. And I'll talk more about that fight later on in this, because there's talk about that fight happening next year. In terms of the other US show, Janibek, he stopped Vincenzo Gitari in 6 rounds. Good performance by Janibek. He's a guy who not enough people talk about him. He is a good fighter, Kazakhstan fighter, but based in the States. Got wins over Steve Butler, Denzel Bentley. That Denzel Bentley fight, it really did boost Denzel Bentley's stock up a lot. And Denzel Bentley, going into that fight, I didn't expect much of him. He had laboured to a decision against Linus Adofia. He had lost to Felix Cash. And that fight, to me, against Felix Cash, do you ever hear the saying, the loser wins? Because Denzel Bentley got knocked out in 3 rounds by Felix Cash. And look, there's a lot of things about that fight that I have just a lot of stuff about that fight. Anyway, I'm not going to get into. But look at Felix Cash and what he's done. He has done a grand total of nothing. All he's done is make life hard for his promoter and his network since then. And Denzel Bentley has got on to world honours. Yes, he lost, but he made very, very hard work of it. Well, Janibek made very, very hard work of him, and he's doing very well at domestic level now. He has this fight coming up against, what's the guy's name? Nini, who he's going to batter, I think. So that win is, done very good. Well, I would say it's aged reasonably well for Janibek, because Denzel Bentley is quite a good fighter. And Janibek is a good fighter in his own right. I'm interested to see more about what he's doing at 160. I haven't seen Keyshawn Davis's fight, right? I haven't seen it in its entirety, so people are going to have to tell me in the comment section how competitive it was. But it went down here as a majority decision. So normally when you see that, and again, it goes to the home fighter, normally when you see that, you kind of raise a bit of an eyebrow. And the guy, Nahir Albright, was 16-2 going into this fight, so he didn't have a stellar record. He lost to Jermaine Ortiz. Who else did he lose to? He lost to a guy in his professional debut called Anthony Loreno, who in itself hasn't his record's not terrible, but he got knocked out in the first round in 2020, and he's not fought since then. I'm assuming that was on a Top Rank show, because it was on the undercard of Leader Alvarez versus Joe Smith Jr. So they're his only 2 L's, and majority decision loss to Keyshawn Davis, who I think is extremely talented. It's right up there, one of the best prospects in boxing. I'm gonna have to have a look at that fight. I really will. And also on the undercard as well, one of the most exciting prospects I'm looking at in the heavyweight division as well. And whatever about boxing in its entirety in the next generation, I think it's in good hands, certainly in the heavyweight division. We have guys like David Adelaide, Fabio Wadley, although I don't think Fabio Wadley's going to do a massive amount, but we have guys like that. We obviously have young Moses Atelma. We have Richard Torres Jr. in the States, along with Big Baby Anderson. And I think Richard Torres Jr., this was, I think, his seventh fight, 7 knockouts. He's only 24 years old. Top Rank have in their midst right there potential star in the heavyweight division. because I believe he is Mexican American, and I think Torres, with that fan base that I think that he would gather, could do a lot. One of my friends, who's a boxing fan as well, messaged me there during the week, and he was actually looking at Richard Torres, and he sent me a video of Torres versus Bakhtadze Yalalov from the amateurs, where Torres gets badly knocked out. And he said to me, do you think that means Torres is a write-off in the pros? And I said, of course it doesn't. Just because someone got knocked out, and look, it's very seldom in amateur boxing, I will attest to this, that you see knockouts of that magnitude, because he was absolutely starched. Tony Yoka got starched badly in the amateurs as well, and obviously he hasn't translated very well in the pro games. But what I will say about Richard Torres Jr. is that one, Bakhtadze Yalalov, massive puncher, tremendous puncher, but he was only about 19 or 20. Like, he wasn't. I'd be more, put it like this, right? If Bakhtadze Yalalov had fought Richard Torres in the amateurs and Torres had been 25, 26, I'd be saying, yeah, I'd be a bit worried about this guy moving forward. I would. Because when you are that old, in your mid-20s, it's not old, but it normally means that you've filled out as much as you're going to fill out. You are essentially in your manly body. You're not going to grow much more. You're not likely to fill out much more. What you have, you're kind of stuck with. And for me, if you were struggling, and obviously he was knocked out cold then, but if you were struggling to take shots at that age, it doesn't mean, well, you're probably stuck with that chin for the rest of your career. Whereas if you're a lot younger, in your teens, very early 20s, you could get knocked out in the amateurs, but that doesn't mean you've got a bad chin necessarily. I mean, David Tua, I know he was knocked out in the amateurs in the first round. Was it against Felix Savon? It might have been against Felix Savon, don't quote me on that, but I know he was knocked out in the first round in the amateurs. And he was only about 18 or 19 in that fight. And David Tua had a tremendous chin at heavyweight. I love David Tua as a fighter. I think he was tremendous. I think he was great entertainment. I was to look at David Tua's fights. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to struggle in the pros. And obviously, Bakhtadze Yalalov was way ahead of the game in terms of amateurs. He was, and look at him in the pro game now. I mean, he is a devastating man as a boxer. I mean, that guy, his power is scary. He is up there. He is up there with the Wilders, with the Zangs of the world in terms of just sheer punching power. I mean, he is right up there with the best of them, is Bakhtadze Yalalov. So that's the top ranked card. Now, we get on to the Misfits show. Now, I watched this show. I will attest to that. I watched it. I didn't watch it in its entirety. I started watching around about 8, half 8. So they had there was a fight going on, and this girl was interviewing this guy backstage. And then they had a fight. And then I think it was that Sal Papi guy who people were talking about his weight loss. And he is one of the few guys who could look aesthetically better but fight dramatically worse. Because people were showing highlights of this guy when he was looking like a fat tubby you-know-what. And he wasn't looking too bad. In this fight, he looked in much better shape, but he didn't look particularly good at all. Now, I'm talking in terms of their skill level to where they are, respectively. I'm not saying, they're looking like the next best thing in terms of prospect. In terms of where they are in their careers, or in their, development. They're novices. They don't look... I've seen worse. I've seen way worse novice fighters. But he got stopped. But the two main talking points were obviously the Logan Paul fight and the KSI Tommy Fury fight. Now, the Logan Paul fight was complete carnage. It was just, you know what, right? It was Dylan Danis. The more I find out about this guy, the more I'm realising that he just comes across as one of those internet trolls. And straight away he's saying, well, Jake Paul couldn't wobble me. Mate, you did nothing. I mean, you would have been better off at least saying, you know what, look, I went in. It reminded me, do you know what it reminds me of, right? It reminds me, if you want to look at a professional fight, of Paul Butler versus Naoya Inoue, where Paul Butler went in there. That was last year. Paul Butler went in as WBO bantamweight champion. And, I expected him to get beaten very early. Everyone else expected him to get bet very early. And he went 11 rounds, absolutely fighting scared. And then went on social media and took that as a moral victory. I was like, mate, you can't take that as a moral victory. All of us watching would have said, fair play. I mean, you went in there and you tried to put it on him. And look, you got battered, but look, fair play. You went 11 rounds and you barely did anything. That's, I wouldn't consider that anything to be proud of. The fact that you went in, you literally just made it your effort just to not get stopped. And like with this Dylan Danis guy here, he literally went in and made it his effort just not to get hurt or stopped or anything. when you give it the, especially when, I think it's worse for him because he's giving it the beans on social media, this, that, and the other, and put on a performance like that where you end up, the highlight of it is you start trying to take the guy down. That was stupid. It was funny to watch, but it was stupid. And then we get to the main event where Tommy Fury narrowly defeats KSI. Now, straight away, they're bringing up the punch stats, and they're saying that KSI should have won the fight because he didn't throw as many punches, but he didn't throw as much, but he landed at a higher connect rate, so therefore that should mean he wins. No, not necessarily. Punch stats, I can never understand why so many people say boxing should be scored with they should do it with punch stats. That should decide who wins it. No, it shouldn't. It doesn't. There's so many factors that you need to take in with punch stats. I did feel that KSI nicked this fight. I was looking at the scorecards, and one of the judges gave Tommy Fury the second round. The way I scored this fight was first and second rounds to KSI. The second round would have to be a 10-8 round because of the point deduction. Tommy Fury started to come into it then, the third, fourth, fifth round. KSI was doing nothing but holding, he wasn't doing much. And then, obviously, KSI did a little bit more in the sixth round. I think Tommy Fury was more fatigued than anything else. And there you go. For me, that was enough for him to win. Right? That was enough for him to win the fight. Now, the sixth round, I wouldn't have really complained too much if he gave the Tommy Fury. So, I'm not saying out and out robbery. But in terms of winning, but not really winning, if that makes sense, Tommy Fury has won this fight by the skin of his teeth, by literally the skin of his teeth. And that is a really, really bad look as far as I'm concerned. The KSI is a YouTuber. He's a guy who started his career playing video games. That was his career, in his bedroom playing video games. I think he was playing FIFA back in the day. I only really started hearing of KSI when he started boxing, to be honest with you, but apparently he was a big time YouTuber, played FIFA and stuff like that. That's how he made his career. He's only really come into the boxing game, doing these Misfits shows, and he's not fighting anybody of any note. He's fighting other novices. Tommy Fury comes from a boxing family. Right, he comes from a boxing family. He had a couple of amateur fights. He said he's been fighting since he was a kid. I seriously doubt that, given how he looks in the ring, but I'll take his word for it. And he is, he is at a horrendously low level. I mean, bear in mind, right, this is a guy who had his first professional fight at the end of 2018, nearly 5 years ago. I believe it was on the undercard of Carl Frampton, Josh Warrington, right? That was December 2018, and he had his first professional fight. Then I think he had another one that he went on Love Island. So he was trying the professional game. He was going about it the way you build up most, prospects, or attempt to build prospects up, where you fight the journeyman on the journeyman scene, you get rounds. If you stop a journeyman who's not known for being stopped, you kind of be like, oh, that's interesting. And that's how it is. We got a sense of the level Tommy Fury's at when he fought. I can't remember the guy's name he fought, but I think he was undefeated going into it about a year or two ago. Might have been a year or so ago. And that same guy, Tommy Fury won the fight, but he had to work for it. And that same guy went in with Ben Whitaker. Ben Whitaker didn't need to get out of first gear. It showed the gulf between Tommy Fury and the guys, the actual prospects, domestic level at light heavyweight. The Tommy Fury winning this fight as close as he did, and he celebrated like it was a world title. For me, and the commentator said the same, that really shouldn't be happening. Especially if you are the boxer. If you are someone who, because Tommy Fury is talking about, I'm done with the YouTuber stuff, etc., etc. So you're telling me you're going to try and forge a career in real boxing, and you really are going life and death with a guy who is a complete novice, who doesn't really, he's athletic, but he doesn't really know what he's doing in the boxing game, and the same with Jake Paul to a lesser extent. You're telling me you're going to try and that's not good. And I was thinking, what analogy could I use to describe this? And for any people would know, I love motor racing as another sport. Boxing is my bread and butter. That's my sport. That's my first love in terms of sports. But I love motor racing too. It was the very first sport I got into, F1 being my favourite. And I would liken it to this, right, for F1 fans. Imagine you're an F1 driver, just a mediocre F1 driver. Let's take someone like Lance Stroll, for example, right? He's an F1 driver. He has been in the sport for years. He's come through the way, he's gone to Formula 3, he's gone to F2, was GP2 back then, and he's got to F1. He's done it that way. Yeah, he's not the best. He's not going to win any races, but he's there. He's competitive. There you go, right? That's Tommy Fury. Now, KSI, imagine someone in Renault Clio Cup, which is essentially you're racing Renault Clios, right? A big difference, big contrasting difference. Or if you want to go a bit more brutal, say you were a go-kart driver, you're racing go-karts, right? Big contrasting difference between a go-kart and an F1 car. Massive difference, right? Now, imagine you take the go-kart driver, you put him in an F1 car, the same F1 car that Tommy Fury is in, or Lance Stroll who want to use an F1 driver, and Lance Stroll out-qualifies him, as you expect him to do. But it's only by something like half a tenth. That's a loss, as far as I'm concerned, because you are the guy with the background in this. You know what you're doing. You know how the way the game works, and you're only barely out qualifying someone who's coming from literally nothing. That's you might be saying, well, yeah, you're expected to win, but you're not expected. You're qualified to out qualify him, but not by that much. It's nothing. It's a blink of an eye. You're expecting a second at least gap. And there's not that gap. And that's the same with Tommy Fury. There's not that massive gap. And for me, if he goes down the road of trying to pursue God knows what at the light heavyweight division, although he's never actually made the weight, because from what I can gather, all he seems to do in training camp is work on how he looks aesthetically in terms of pumping weights, instead of actually working on actual boxing fundamental training. He doesn't seem to be doing any of that, because there was things that KSI was doing in there where you could easily telegraph the shots, the way he was turning side on, the way he was moving his head, because he was moving his head every single time the same way, and you could be like, okay, I could maybe time him, or maybe I could set him up for a right hand if he does that again. And none of this was registering with Tommy Fury. Simple little things, you're reading what your opponent is doing. And KSI, the speed early on, I'll give him that, but once he slowed down a little bit and it was clear that he was doing the same thing over and over again, you're like, okay, he's doing that over and over again, right, now I'm going to counter you. It was almost like Tommy Fury couldn't figure that out. So I wouldn't be holding out much hope on him really doing anything at at any level. I mean, I was going to say world level, but even domestic level, to be honest with you, in the arena of boxing. I honestly can't say. I think that if whoever he turns over with now, or turns over, he already is a pro, but whoever he signs with to promote him moving forward, because he's not with Queensbury or Frank anymore. So, he might sign with Eddie or someone like that. They are going to have to match him as careful as can be, because this guy is seriously an accident waiting to happen in proper boxing. Now, I used the term proper boxing there because I'm going to use this to go into my next little topic. So, this Misfits show that happened last night, a lot of people are complaining about Misfits. They don't like the YouTube of boxing. They think it's bad for boxing. All right, that is something that's been said a lot about these shows, that they feel as though it's bad for boxing. And my take on it is it really that bad for boxing if we are actually helping to get new fans and eyes on actual boxing? Is that a bad thing if they came from, Misfits? If someone started out watching YouTubers fight and they kind of took an interest and said, oh, I like what these guys are doing, I wonder what the actual guys are like, and they maybe turn on a fight and they're watching Canelo, or they go back and look at Triple G, in his prime, someone like that, or they turn on a Queensbury show, for argument's sake, and they watch some of Warren's fighters and they say, oh, that guy looks good, I like this Nicky Ball guy, he's entertaining, or this Moses Atelma, no way he's only 18, he looks fun to watch. And they start to get into it, and then they start to frequently watch the regular boxing, the real boxing more. Is that a bad thing? Because then you've got more eyes, more fans, and potentially, if you look at the younger generation, you'll get more people who'll be inspired to take the sport up. Again, I ask, if Misfits helps do that, in the long run, is it a bad thing? I know some people would look at the short term and say that, it's making boxing look a bit silly. I think that the events I don't think it's really necessarily making boxing look. I think just the guys just are making themselves look silly, like that Dylan Dennis guy. I don't think that's necessarily him making the sport look bad. I think just him looking like an idiot. I think that's all he's doing, just making himself look like a complete twat. That's all he's done. I don't know if it's necessarily done any bad to boxing, but if you look at it, as I said, in the long term, someone watches that and says, look, I'd like to know how to throw a shot like Logan Paul, or do this or do that. And let's say they go to the gym, they like it, they pick it up, they have an amateur career, they do something, they turn over, they win a British, a European, a Commonwealth, they fight for a world title, they get interviewed. What inspired you? Jake Paul, KSI, Tommy Fury. Is that a bad thing? I don't think it is. And I think when you look long term, that could, I'm predicting that's going to happen. And I'm not predicting it's going to happen for one specific person. I think it's going to happen to a variety of fighters in the future moving forward. It wouldn't surprise me if in maybe even less time, because let's say you're 15 and you're watching Misfits. In 5 years' time, you'd be 20. You have your first amateur fight at 15. 5 years' time, God knows where you'd be. Joshua was, what, 18? Deontay Wilder was 19, I think he was, when they had their first amateur fights. And they're the guys we talk about probably most frequently in boxing, or some of them who we talk about most frequently. And if someone was to do that, off the back of these Misfit shows, go down their local amateur gym, have a couple of amateur fights, turn over pro, work their way up, maybe get to the Olympics, God knows. You never know. I mean, I'm not Nostradamus, but no one else is, so no one can ever know, like, would that happen? It might very well, 5 years' time, who knows? Again, I ask, is that a bad thing, really, in the grand scheme of things? Because look, I didn't obviously pay for the Misfits show, I watched it by other means. Was I compelled by the spectacle of the fights? Not necessarily. Was I, in awe of the talent on display? No, of course not. But the whole show, the event itself, did I kind of get a laugh out of it? Yeah, I did. And I've always been someone who, I've said it before, I like the car crash TV element. I like, seeing stuff and it being a bit more edgy, a bit more gritty, and the presenters having a bit more fun, the commentators having a bit more fun. I'm all for that because I think it's severely lacking in the world. Comedy is dead. It is. I haven't watched a comedy show that's been, this decade, because they're all dead and bland. There's no funny shows anymore. There's nothing funny really at all. There's no characters. There's no real charisma in any shows anymore, whether it be sport or anything. And this is kind of like the closest thing we're going to get, which for me, I like, because I like characters. I like, shows to be a little bit more rough around the edges. And I remember saying this in the Element group. One thing you got to say is Misfits is an example of, if people like something, they'll just flock towards it. If you build it, it will come. If you build it, they will come, I should say. Because this didn't need to be, no one needed to say, Misfits, we're going to chuck it here, we're going to do this, and, we get all these. They just started something, people liked it, it was a concept that no one's really thought of, and it's done well. KSI is obviously richer for it. So, if you don't like, I could understand how boxing fans could have watched last night and not liked it, and that's fine. What I would say is, if Misfits is something you really don't like, I've seen people, like Anthony Fowler, like tweeting about this, and I got a lot of time for Anthony Fowler, but I see him tweeting saying, like, this is garbage, this is this. I'm like, well, mate, why are you watching it then? I mean, like, if you know fully in advance watching something you're not going to like it, then my advice to you would be, well, just don't watch it. That would be what I'd be, just don't watch it then. If you don't like it, just don't watch it. It's pretty simple. So that's my thoughts on that. Now into some boxing news. I will touch on this though. Eddie Hearn was there, and this is not Misfits related, but he was just at the show. He said that Joshua is looking to get back out in the month of December and looking at the Deontay Wilder fight next year. The Hrgovic seems to be, that ship has sailed, it seems, because there's no mention of that. He told Garrett A. Davis that, not about Joshua, not about Hrgovic obviously, but there's no mention of Hrgovic. I would assume that Eddie Hearn was kind of hoping that the IBF would say, okay, Joshua is going to be number 2 regardless of what Otto Valin has done by beating Murat Kasayev. They haven't done that. The IBF basically, they said, look, it's an eliminator, so we are going to treat it as that, and we are going to rank him as we see fit, which is down at number 2. Do I necessarily agree with him being number 2 based upon just the one win of Murat Kasayev, who himself hasn't done much? That is, no. I to be honest with you, no. I would say that Otto Valin, should he earn a high ranking for it? Yeah, but number 2, I mean, considering the fact that, you could argue, and I would definitely make this case, that the fact that Martin Bakole beat Tony Yoka, albeit last year, I would attest to that, would give him more of a right to have a higher ranking than Otto Valin, who beat Murat Kasayev, who has done zilch over the last few years, as has Otto Valin, But that, as I said in several videos, the rankings, you will wreck your brain trying to work out the rankings, and some of us may never work them out. Josh Warrington said that a rematch with Lee Wood and him should happen next. We've had a controversial ending. I was winning the fight. There needs to be a part 2. I'd like to see a part 2. It looks likely that Lee Wood is going to move up. I would imagine that Josh Warrington will as well. Hey, look, I'm all for it. Part 2, 130 pounds. I'm all for it. The first fight was great. Josh Warrington, if he keeps it together, I mean, you would he should win, but Lee Wood has that power at 130. That could be even more fun. So I'm all for that. This is an interesting one here. The British Boxing Board of Control has now stated that their heavyweight title will be actually on the line for Fabio Wadley versus David Adeleye after all, because although the fight is taking place in Saudi Arabia, not even Europe, on October 28th, it will be held under the British Boxing Board of Control's jurisdiction. Does that essentially mean that the board are sanctioning these fights? As in that, like, you know, Moses Atelma's fight, Martin Bakoli's fight, Parker, are these all going to be under the auspices of the British Boxing Board of Control? Because, you know, it's in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. It's not even Europe. So that's a strange one. But look, I'm kind of happy in a way that they will have the British title on the line. It is something nice to add. You know, I understood why they... because originally this wasn't going to be for the British title. And I understood that completely why it wouldn't be. Because why would you? You know, why would you fight for however many grand, let's say 70, 80 grand, when you're going to make probably at least six figures in Saudi? It's just a no-brainer. In terms of other things to do with Frank Warren, WBA have now officially dismissed his appeal over the Alexander Usyk Daniel Dubois low blow controversy, saying that basically the referee, it's his jurisdiction, he's the one who decides whether that was low or not, and he has deemed it not to be. So there you go. I would say Frank Warren is probably not going to be crying too many tears over that. But I would say, come interviews, just to keep face, he'll say, you know, I don't understand what the WBA are doing, blah, 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 blah. But you can tell it'll just be kind of keep face. I'd say deep down he's kind of like, don't care, got Fury versus Usyk, don't care. Sorry, Daniel, we'll try and get you a crack at the WBO or something like that. But this fight, bread and butter for all of us. So I'd say he doesn't give an iota about that. Garcia, I was going to say Garcia there. I just seen the A and I was like, what? No. Gervonta Tank Davis versus Isaac Cruz rematch. So this will be the second fight. Is reportedly now being discussed. So Isaac Cruz versus Tank Davis 2. Yeah, look, Pitbull was very competitive first time around. He was originally supposed to be on the undercard, and the original main event was meant to be Rowley versus Tank Davis. And as soon as they announced Pitbull, I was like, damn, you know, he's actually got a better opponent, believe it or not. It was a good fight. Look, I'd like to see it again. I'd prefer to see Davis against Shakur or Davis against Haney if it's at 140 pounds. I know Haney is fighting pro grade, but you get me. Look, I wouldn't mind seeing him against Pitbull again, but I'd rather see something else. And another fight that I would rather not see again is Terence Bud Crawford versus Errol Spence, because it's now reportedly planned for February, although it's claimed there's no agreement on the weight yet. So, yeah, look, Crawford versus Spence 2. As you all know, I was tremendously excited, tremendously excited when this fight was announced. And, you know, the build-up, everything about it, I was over the moon that this fight was happening, right? And look, I expected a very competitive fight, and it just wasn't that. And I think that the rematch is going to be no different. It'll probably be even easier for Crawford. And for me, I think that Spence should just take that big fat paycheck and just sail off into the sunset. There was that neurologist who was on BDA who basically was saying that in his opinion Spence is suffering neurologically, and if there is any risk of that, I'd be saying to Spence, you know, let's there's other things out there. Another fight with Crawford, I don't know. I just don't see him doing anything different in that fight. I see him just getting stopped earlier. In terms of other fighters who are making the return to the ring, January 6th, so we're already getting fights announced for next year. Virgil Ortiz will return to the ring. That was made, announcement I should say, was made at the WBO's annual convention a couple of days ago. So Virgil Ortiz, he will be fighting at 154 pounds, no longer fighting at welterweight. So that will be Virgil Ortiz's next move. Now, as many of you know, I like Virgil Ortiz. I have since I first started seeing him back in, I think, 2019. Been very high on this kid, rated him very highly. The only problem, right, is he whatever he was doing to make 147 pounds has taken its toll on him by the looks of things, or by the sounds of things, because that's what 3 times he was meant to fight Stanley Owens, and each time it was him who had to pull out due to health reasons. I would imagine it's stemming from the fact that he's struggling to make the weight. At some point you have to wonder, how bad have you done it? And have you overdone it to the point where you're going to actually take something out of yourself, even moving forward, going to 154 pounds? So I hope that we see the same Virgil Ortiz that we'd seen before, but I would be a bit worried. I'm not going to lie, I would be a bit worried about him, that he won't look the same. Fights that are rumoured to be getting announced, December time. I would imagine this will take place in the south of the UK, probably in Bournemouth. But Chris Billam-Smith, his first world title defence looks set to be against Mastanak. Mastanak is a contender. He's a contender, it's fair to say. Looks set to take place in December in the UK. Now, there was rumours that Lawrence Okolie was going to invoke the rematch clause. And now these are rumours, so take these with a grain of salt, but I've heard these from several other sources, that the reason the Lawrence Okolie rematch isn't happening is because Sky just don't want to do it. The first fight was garbage, it was horrendous, and Sky apparently are just not interested. And that is Ben Shalom in a nutshell, isn't it, when you think about it? That Ben Shalom, here is a guy, I've got a lot of time for Lawrence Okolie, right? He could be a absolutely fantastic, and people who I know who have known Lawrence Okolie or met him have said the same. He seems like an absolute genuine bloke, but his style is just, it's awful. It doesn't make for compelling viewing. It really doesn't. And this is a guy who Eddie Hearn tried, and I give Eddie Hearn credit, like he does try with some of these guys, but he tried, he failed to make Lawrence Okolie a star. He tried, he failed. It happens, right? You will always have good fighters who are never going to quite break that ceiling in terms of being a star, but they'll always be good. You know, they'll fill out the copper box. They'll be great as a maybe co-main or third feature on a fight show, on a fight night. They'll make some decent money. They may never break through the glass ceiling and become a star. That is what that is. In terms of them being a fighter, they're still a very, very good fighter. Ben Shalom looks at Lawrence Okolie and says, I'm going to make you the face of Sky. Like, what the actual hell? I'm sure even Lawrence Okolie didn't believe him saying that. And now it's like, well, he's stunk the joint out twice and taken an L. What do we do? You're like, yes, what do you do? I just, mind blown. Absolutely flipping mind blown. And yeah, that's literally Ben Shalom in a nutshell. Like, the guy just, everything he touched just seemed to turn to stone. Not gold. Far from it. And that's where we are with him now. If that is true and Sky are just saying, look, we're not interested, not that maybe they're not necessarily interested in Lawrence Okolie fighting again, but just seeing that fight again, I mean, like, what does that really say? Like, that's mental. Absolutely bloody mental. Cannot believe that. So that's my thoughts on everything. Let me know yours in the comments below. I have to end it here because I got to do a lot. Well, literally, it's just gone 7 o'clock, so we're going live now in a few minutes. Hope you enjoyed the video. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. For everyone watching, I always say at the end of these, I hope you have a great week. I hope the phone rings for someone with some good news. Hope we all have a good week. Lads and lassies, smash the like button. Hit subscribe. All that good stuff. Let's get 15k as quick as we can. Peace.